All right, welcome back to the Death by Tyranny podcast. This one's going to be a late one. I got tired of doing podcasts when I could, squeezing them in. Work's had me all over the place, and then I get on here and I do one, and I'm half asleep, and I don't feel like I'm bringing you guys the best quality me that I can be bringing to you. And maybe that has something to do with the viewership, is the quality of the podcast. Obviously, if it's low energy, you're going to get low results, yada yada yada. So we're going to try to keep this one a little bit more up tempo. And starting off, I want to ask you guys a big question. If you think the problem with America can be brought down to one simple question. Now, we've known for a long time that through the history of mankind, there has always been some kind of conflict. It's usually because you have two different belief systems that are fighting over acquisition of land or resources, and sometimes just because their ideology calls for them to conquer other belief systems. Now, I know we would all like to believe that in 2022, humanity has learned to grow past this. But yet in 22, we have seen, if anything, that humanity will never change when it comes to this aspect of life. You will always have people that are growing, trying to survive, some trying to thrive. I would think most countries are trying to thrive or be the best version of theirself. And to do that, they need land. They need to grow their populations. They need to acquire assets and just simple things to go about their everyday life. And so you have a large portion of the United States, at least, probably most of the Western world, that thinks this is the way of how old humanity thought. But yet here we see in 2022 that Russia is deciding to go branch out and to recapture or reclaim some of their old land for assets, for just to have the land. There's a lot of reasons why Russia would want Ukraine. But the fact still remains that this is nothing new to humanity. And the only people that are in fault here are really the people who thought that this just wouldn't happen anymore. And I think in the weeks, months, years to come, we're going to see more of it. You already hear people talking about how China will reclaim Thailand, and in China's eyes, it is already theirs. So the only thing that is going to kind of add fuel to that fire is people continuing to say that Thailand is an independent country, that if China was to try something to absorb it into China, that they would try to stop it or prevent it. This is going to anger the government in China and only going to push them to make that move a little bit sooner. So to think that the conflict in humanity, that war is going away, is just extremely naive. So we have to take a look at the Democrats and the people on the left in this country. And quite frankly, if we want to have a hard conversation with ourselves, even some of the libertarians where they just want to be left alone. This is all good in theory. It all makes a lot of sense in theory. And in a perfect world, this would probably be the best case scenario. But we will never live in a perfect world, and humans will never be perfect. In a lot of ways, we are on, if you had to draw a line down the middle on good humanity and bad humanity, in an overall arching population, most people would say, I think most of us are good people and want to do the right thing. But if you branch that out to encompass the whole world, I don't know that that's true. I think that you have an overwhelming percentage of those people that are inevitably going to seek out greed for themselves, for their family, for their country, for their government. And so these conflicts are here to stay. And to try to force our government into something else that could not defend from this, like you see our military doing today, where they are more worried about the feelings of the soldiers that make up the army rather than the tactics and holding a standard of people in said army to defend our country. We are going to feel the consequence of this in the coming years. Believe you me. And the more that we claim that China won't take Thailand and that Russia will not conquer over Ukraine is only escalating the United States' downfall. People are inherently evil. We just have to learn to accept this fact. Even the people that have great lives and go about their day not bothering anybody, this might make up the mass majority of people in the United States, but they are still being very naive. A lot of those people aren't thinking about what's going to happen in the coming days. I know a lot of us aren't old enough to remember how 2008, 2009 went. Well, you had a lot of panic, you had a lot of anxiety, you had a lot of suicide, a lot of depression. A lot of people lost their homes. In fact, if I was going to say that there was a major economical collapse that was so spread out, almost everyone felt it, it would have been around the 2008, 2009 era. Well, we're getting ready to head back into something that looks a lot like that, except for very much so accelerated as far as the time it's going to take to get from good to very bad. And when it gets to very bad, it is going to eclipse what we saw in 2009. Now, another reason why all of this is going to be so terrible for us in the United States is because of COVID. Well, are you saying that COVID is going to cause economic issue? Yes, all of it. COVID has touched so many parts of our country that we haven't even began to realize how bad that so the things that they did to try to limit what was going on in COVID is going to have the opposite effect in the coming years. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I'm sure I worded that pretty fucked up. So what I mean by that is you have a lot of people that are starting to detach from reality. You have children that spent some of the most critical years in school not seeing each other and developing normal social skills. Not only that, but you had some of the people in the rebellious generations, or not generations, but age groups. You know, your let's say 14 to 25, the people that are trying to find their identity and want to make a difference in the world, they seen the world through a new lens. And those are going to be the thought leaders that grow into our government in the years to come. And that is also going to have a negative effect. Well, why is this such a big deal? Well, a lot of those youths on the higher end of the age group, let's say 18 to 25, those people living through COVID, developing some of their first work experiences, some of their first relationships, that is going to affect them on how they weigh out their decisions when they get to the government. The way that group of people in the United States looks at our government is going to have an effect on the government. And I think that a lot of those age groups think that they can just protest their way out of something, and that's just not the case. And what I'm saying, that the big question, the most important question we really need to get over here is, are we going to trust our federal government to get us through this next economical crisis? We've seen how piss poorly they handled the COVID response. We see how poorly some of the Democrat countries are using their police forces, how poorly those police forces are being trained. We see what's going on in our military. Well, let me tell you this. If you haven't asked yourself whether or not you trust the federal government, you are already behind. And I hate being the one to tell you, but the federal government is made up of those people, the people that are bad, the people that make poor decisions, the people that make decisions based on their own individual greed. And I don't think it has ever been more apparent than with Joe Biden. You see this new stuff come out with Hunter Biden and with any other president. First off, I'm sure there were incidents with presidents and their children, and some of that stuff was probably washed away. But there is a gaping hole in the dam and the corrupted shit that Hunter Biden has done in his past, and it keeps pouring out into social media. It keeps pouring out and trying to break through to mainstream media, and all of this is being hidden. Why? They don't want you to think that when you go out and make decisions for yourself, whether you're buying a new house, whether you're paying your taxes, what you decide to do with your Second Amendment rights, they don't want you to think in your head that they're going to do you wrong. They want you to think and depend upon the federal government. This is just not reality. It has never been the case. So I know a lot of us probably have heard the name Blackwater at least once or twice. And usually in mainstream media, when they talk about Blackwater, they do it in a negative way. And this is for two reasons. One reason is President Trump cared. He liked Blackwater. You know, he spoke highly of them. There were times where he said that Blackwater did more than the federal government did to handle situations. And if you ever actually look into Blackwater and what they've done for the United States government for assets overseas, what they've done to help develop some of the training and how we handle very crucial situations, they've done a lot of good things. And the second reason why mainstream media likes to paint these guys as bad guys is there was an incident where they seen an opportunity where they could label them as the bad guy, and it was very easy to turn the public opinion on Blackwater. But why would they do that? Well, the reason they were doing it, and the libertarians can also kind of see the importance here. So you always have these conversations with the libertarians about being left alone and doing what makes you feel good. And usually the response or the counter argument to that is, what are you going to do about, healthcare? What are you going to do about the transportation routes, the highways, the state routes? How are you going to absorb this into civilian society so that the civilian population has more control over these things? And Blackwater was doing that, and they were doing it in some of the most crucial points of our government. They were doing it in the defense and security spectrum of the government. They were stepping in and helping the federal government in their shortcomings, not only with manpower, but intelligence, with technology, with funds. When the federal government wanted shit to happen, and they because of all the bureaucracy that those kind of decisions involve, they would just ask Blackwater to handle it. And because Blackwater is owned by one individual, and you don't have to jump through hoops and climb ladders to get through the chain of command to make critical decisions, a lot of those scenarios and missions were accomplished very well, very fast, and very effectively. Okay? And so when you get a new administration going from the George W. Bush administration to the Obama administration, where I feel like Obama could kind of sense this, that we have a civilian contract company that is handling some of these outcomes a lot better than the federal government. And eventually we have to put a stop to that. Because if the general population gets this concept, right, if they not only a lot of them think it, but if they see it followed through and that it actually has good outcomes for the federal government to have little to no say-so in the big decisions and have all that power and have the monopoly on violence, that this could go very poorly for the federal government. So they began to paint Blackwater as bad guys. They began to push them out of the federal government. And why I say the most important question is whether or not you trust our federal government is because we had a chance with Blackwater to develop some type of a security layer or base for civilians where the federal government had, an idea of what was going on, but didn't really have a whole lot of the final say so when it came to how the company was going to carry out its missions at the crucial points, right? They just asked them to do something. Blackwater went out and got this done. I've talked about this before where I think we really need to develop in the United States some type of civilian military based branch that is separate from the federal government, all three branches of government, and actually make the militia that the Second Amendment is talking about. Actually develop some group or large portion, side portion of the population that is not only of the mindset that they could take back the power from the federal government, but they were funded enough to do so, trained enough to do so, and prepared to do just that. And that's what Blackwater was. If you want to talk about any group or company that has an opportunity or had an opportunity to overthrow the American federal government and actually have a pretty decent to equal shot in that battle, that was Blackwater. So to think that the federal government was going to allow that to continue forever is just ridiculous. Now, where is Blackwater today? Well, Blackwater is still doing the things that they do best. I don't necessarily know that they do it under the name Blackwater because we'll get into it, but the federal government pretty much tried to break them financially and destroy them as a company. So I believe that the owner of that company moved on and probably developed something new. But understand that even though he had all this money, even though he had the knowledge and the power, when the federal United States government turned its back on him and decided to really try to destroy everything he stood for, his company, his family, his life, he had an opportunity that would arise from the ashes of that circumstance, and that was Russia. Russia came to him and said, hey, we want you to do what you did for the federal government. We want you to build a training center. We want you to show our elite soldiers how to control these chaotic environment and how to really problem solve and get the mission done under, crazy odds and circumstances. And he said, no, this is just another point in history where somebody who could have done a lot of good for the country probably was, offered a great deal of money, had the opportunity to work with Russia, and declined it. And we're no a stranger to this when it comes to President Trump. And even the stuff with President Trump in Russia was nothing out of the norm for presidential nominees to talk to foreign leaders before the election. That is nothing new. That is something that presidential nominees have done for decades, possibly even centuries, okay? They just decided to take that situation and try to turn the eyeglass to where it just shattered the viewable actual facts into something that they wanted it to be. Well, they did that with Trump, and they did it with Blackwater, and these are two people that were doing incredible things to not only help secure the U.S. government, but also had, these great minds that could have took us into the next century to maintain America being the best of the best, to take them into the next generation after generation and be what we think America is. Because right now, America is not that. We are only falling behind. We are not growing in any aspect of the things that you think about when you think America. We are selling our land to foreign countries, right? So some of the things that we take for granted that are very crucial assets to the United States are being squandered away. Our natural resources, our farmland, a lot of our intelligence. You just seen, how many billions and billions of dollars of technology handed over to the Taliban in Afghanistan. So we're really losing there. And I think that the general population of the United States is all under the trance and belief that the federal government is doing this on the behalf of your best interest. We have to break this cycle. The federal government will do corrupt and very evil things to get the things that they want done. And you just have to understand that. We have to get past this very important question so we can start putting our country back together. I want you guys to look into the owner of Blackwater and the things that he accomplished. I think he's coming out with a book. I'll go ahead and look up his name here for you. But a lot of the information that I'm talking about here, I actually got from a video I watched on YouTube. It was a podcast on Vigilance Elite. It's a Navy SEAL. He does a podcast. He brings people in, and they talk about some of the, real important events in their life. And he had a chance to talk to the owner of Blackwater in his latest podcast. Now I just got to remember how to spell it. It's not every day I spell vigilance. There we go. I found it. But yeah, I highly recommend you guys go out and listen to this podcast, watch this podcast, because in it, not only will you see a lot of the good things that Blackwater was able to offer our country, but if you look at it from a sky's eye view, you can really start to grasp the concept that if civilians had more control over our defense, over our security, over this monopoly of violence that the United States government has, it doesn't necessarily mean that it would fall apart. And in a lot of ways, it would be a good thing. Not only would we not have to worry about the military ever turning on the people, we would, in a sense, have our own military to ensure that the federal government and the United States civilians were always on the level. That is the biggest problem we are faced with today, that your average United States civilian is not on the level. You can't do things that politicians and the federal government can do. And I'm not talking about, them going and casting votes and bringing forward legislation. I'm talking about insider trading in the stock market. I'm talking about when their loved ones and family members do things that they should be in prison for, just that kind of shit going away. Some of the opportunities that their corruption allows, if politicians are allowed to continue to conduct themselves the way they do, and they will never change that, right? If right now you went into your boss's office and he said, I'll give you a raise, but it's up to you. It's up to you to decide whether you get that raise or whether or not we pay you less money. Okay? It's up to you. You get to decide. Well, that's in essence what Congress does when it comes to how much politicians make, what they are allowed to get away with that your everyday United States citizen cannot get away with. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling here. Got off track a little bit, but it is Vigilance Elite over at youtube.com. I believe the host name is Sean Ryan, like I said, ex-Navy SEAL, and it's Eric Prince. So Eric Prince is the, I guess it would be former CEO of Blackwater. I believe he sold the company. Like I said, he went on to do what he was doing for the United States for other country when it came to pirates and international waters. The reason why you don't hear about that stuff a lot anymore is because he went and he solved that issue. He didn't go in and ask this politician to agree with this politician and ask this committee for money to get this done. No, he was asked to solve a problem. He went in, he said, this is what we got to do. They said, do whatever it takes, and he got the fucking job done. This is what we need to make sure that our federal government here in the United States either starts doing and adopting a very much so unbiased, uh, straight, direct route to solving some of the most crucial issues we're faced with in the United States, or we need to develop a group of people within the civilians of the United States that form something like Blackwater. It doesn't necessarily have to be a company or an LLC, but we need something that isn't beneath the federal government. It is beside the federal government. The federal government was never made to run our country. It was never made to make sure that people were punished to the max to allow the 1% to rise up and gain as much power and money as they possibly could. And that's what's going on now. I promise you, if we had something that would directly meet the federal government and all its assets, you know, at least somewhat close on the financial spectrum and power and ability to commit violence that they have, they would not be doing the shit that they are doing. And I think the reason why this idea is going to take a long time to ever make any headway is because most of the United States citizens don't believe that the federal government is doing wrong. If you ask them, hey, do you think politicians are corrupt? They will tell you yes. If you say, hey, do you think that Congress and the president does things that we don't know about that are probably not in the best interest of the people? They would say yes. But when it comes to their everyday lives, they are doing nothing about it, as if it's not happening. They go to the voting booths like none of this ever happened. They will genuinely understand that the politician, even on a local level, has done some form of immoral thing, and they will still go the very next election cycle and keep that politician in office. So to me, what that says is either they don't truly believe that those politicians are corrupt and evil, or they just don't care. And we have to get away from that mindset. We have to care about what our federal government is doing behind our backs, because right now it's a lot, and it's horrible things. And I used to have some type of hope when it came to people really waking up and feeling the fire inside them to take their country back, and not in like a January 6th aspect, although it might escalate to that eventually, but not that, but at least the 75% of civilians in the United States would at least be in the mindset to be like, politicians are evil. Our federal government is no longer doing good on behalf of the people. And as soon as we can all ask ourselves that important question, do we trust the federal government, which we should not, and whether or not we care about that. That's we have to at least get to that point, and I don't think we're there yet. And that's why this downfall into recession and most likely a depression is going to happen. It's going to hit us hard. It's going to hit us fast. And in a lot of ways, sure, we can blame it on the federal government. But on the other hand, we have to blame it on ourselves. The response to COVID, sure, was there legislation that was brought forth? Was there laws that were created and enforced? Yes, but we all complied on a very, very large scale. So we did nothing about it, and we had to know, right? I would almost find it unimaginable to think that most adult human beings in the United States did not see a recession coming when you're printing paper like it's your fucking job. And not just a little bit, not to help out, but more than we've ever printed combined. And the existence of the United States, we printed in over, little less than 2 years. So to think that we weren't going to feel that economically is just stupid. There's no other way to describe you not thinking that that was going to have a negative impact on the economy. Then you're just being stupid. Stupid are really, really lazy. Um, so, and unfortunately, we have a lot of lazy people in our society. And our federal government doesn't want to do anything about it because they have us where they want us. They know that as long as they keep printing money, as long as they keep, pushing diversity, inclusion, and sending checks to people's mailbox, they aren't going to question it, right? Because let's face it, 200 years ago, if you were in the ghetto and the circumstances of your surroundings were trapping you into a life of poverty, you would have done something about it. But people in the United States today, they don't care. As long as they can smoke their weed, collect their check at the first of the month, they just keep on living and not caring. And so to think that the United States government doesn't want to bring more people like that into the country that will vote for them because all they have to do is hoodwink them into welfare, you have to understand that's the game plan, right? That's why our borders are unprotected because they know it's cheaper, easier, and a lot more manageable to bring people in through the border that has no concept of this idea of America, right? They don't have that passion. They don't understand what's at stake here because they've never experienced it. The immigrants of 2 years ago are not the same immigrants as 20 years ago. The immigrants 20 years ago seen what America was about, and then they got to come to this country, experience it for themselves, see how amazing it is, and now they would fight and die. At least I would like to think so, for this country that they've grown to love. The immigrants today, that they're not the same. They are coming to this country. They are just getting fed handout after handout. Anytime anything happens to them negatively, they can say it's a hate crime, and they're being caged in poverties, in ghettos, right? But they don't care about that as long as they can ask for the next immediate thing that they need. They don't care about that cage that surrounds them. Even some of your minority groups here in the United States, some of the older generations understood this, right? That's why you can't really go after one um, minority group individually, because if they've been here for the last 100 to 200 years, some of those people have been able to obtain that mindset that America is great, we have to fight for it, and that the federal government, so they know that what the federal government is doing now is wrong, and they want to stop it. But the mass flood of immigration today is just utterly and totally different. So the people that have some of this empathy for the people down at the border, I mean, I understand it. It looks tragic. It looks painful. It's not something that any of us would want to experience. But you have to understand that in the margins that we are bringing them in, it's unsustainable. And if we allow them to keep doing it, not only is it unsustainable, but it is going to change the idea of America. It's going to change what people are willing to fight and die for in this country. And that's not a good thing. That's why we are at where we are at. That is how we keep following the terrible progressive direction that we are going in, because of the youth that doesn't know any better, because of the mindset of the immigrants that pour in over our borders. So why are we not, as citizens, going to our fellow new immigrants or children or our youth and saying, you're going to read a lot of stuff in your lifetime. You're going to see a lot of stuff on the internet. But the government, all government, has proved time and time again that they will abuse power. So you cannot go into a voting booth thinking that these politicians have the best intentions to serve you on an individual level. You have to be prepared to fight on an individual level because we don't have nothing. We don't have a plan B in the United States, and we're not any closer to developing that plan B because none of the people in 2022 want to ask themselves that question. Even though we have evidence, it's in the history books, but for some reason we just skim over those chapters and go to the chapters that point to the United States citizens being bad people. You don't ever hear about how the Obama administration had Blackwater get guns for princes of other countries. And then when they were done with Blackwater, going after them and saying that they broke laws and sending the ATF after them and imprisoning people that worked for Blackwater when they were told by the current, at the time, the current administration to do those things. You have to understand that our federal government is that fucking corrupt. We no longer need to put the fact that civilians in the United States 100 years ago were a little racist, right? We've moved past that in a better direction, and we know how to handle that. It's no longer the issue they are trying to make it. The reason they want you to focus on that is because if you begin to understand why it was able to go on so long, what the federal government was doing in the time that we had the blinders over our eyes focused on only racism, you would see a very different government. You would see a very corrupt government. You would see a government that asked some of the greatest people we have to offer that volunteered to sacrifice their lives to do things that totally disregarded their lives. They did things to put them in situations where it was iffy so they could then go back and attack them if the public didn't look highly upon that decision. It's insane. And we want to take it out on those people, right? That the federal government points that spotlight at and says, look, these were bad people that made it through the system. This was a bad person that made it all the ways through Navy SEAL boot camp and buds and all that. No, that is not the case at all. What happened is they were asked to do something very fucked up by their government. They did it, and then when the public didn't take kindly to that, they turned on those people. And that is the government that is running us today. That is the Hillary Benghazi situation. That's what happened to Blackwater. So to think that any of us in the United States that doesn't have ties to the federal government isn't vulnerable to the things that they have at their fingertips to destroy our lives and to go after our family. I mean, how many times do you need to see this? And trust me, you don't see a quarter, 3-4% of the things that the federal government is doing that is wrong, that is directly targeting United States citizens and destroying their lives. Some of the stuff they can't maintain and tuck away in a desk drawer and make it seem like it never happened. But there are so many more events. There are so many more citizens that have suffered on behalf of the federal government. You just only hear about the Wacos. You just only hear about, the mass shootings that they want to hear about. You don't want to hear about how the federal government knew about 99% of the mass shooters before they went out and shot those places up. You only want to place blame at the tools' feet. The tools would have never stopped that. In fact, the reality of it is the people that were aware of that situation, aware of that person and their intentions and their feelings and the mindset that they were in. The only way to stop that is to Take those same tools that they're trying to ban and keep away from you and put them in the hands of the good people that are willing to stop situations like that. And yet, for the most advanced part of society and some of the wealthiest communities in the world, they're doing the total opposite. We're still having debates on something that is so phenomenally obvious, it blows my mind. And we hear it so often that even the people that are fighting against it are slowly starting to crack. Do you know how aggravating it is to hear people that say they stand for the Second Amendment say, well, if you think that individual citizens should be able to own anything the federal government has, then you don't want to be a part of the conversation. How about this? How about you understand that banning guns is not going to fix the situation? So, how is me thinking that I can own whatever I want any part of that conversation? It's not. You're just starting to crack because you've heard it so many times. You've heard we have to come to the table and make a bipartisan decision, and maybe, let's don't take it away from 18-year-olds. Let's not ban AR-15s. But why should we own nukes? What the fuck? That's not any part of the conversation. You're diverting. You're trying to avoid having the conversation because you feel like we've already lost, or you're so beat down and abused from all the Second Amendment rights that you've already lost. How about you go to the table if you want to have a realistic conversation with people about mass shootings and say, look, this has nothing to do with the tools that were used. We're not going to talk about the tools that were used. What we are going to do is we're going to talk about the mental issues in the United States. What we are going to talk about is how to make it easier for your everyday civilian to protect their children in schools. Let's have a conversation where we begin to talk about putting resources to holding families together. Let's talk about putting resources together that bring communities together. And so they feel like they have more of a moral responsibility to take care of the people that live in those communities. But the tools that are used in mass shootings have nothing to do with it. Yet, you never hear this from the federal government. You never hear this from the politicians. You don't even hear it from the politicians that are supposed to be for gun rights. They're not even using the obvious questions and answers that they need to bring to the table to this conversation. They still want to talk about what rights we're going to lose to make the other half of the table feel safer and better. What the fuck are we doing? And now you have people on social media that are coming out and they're beginning to crack and turn to the dark side, just like the Republicans that were supposed to be there for our gun rights. Now they're joining in and saying the same dumb shit. Well, maybe civilians shouldn't own this. Maybe we should lower the... Shut the fuck up. We had a country, right? We had a country where a 15-year-old boy could have a fucking double-barrel shotgun, sawed off if he wanted to, in the back of his truck, drove to fucking school, and was a productive member of society, and more than likely never had to grab that gun to use in self-defense situation. Do you know why that was? Because those communities were stronger. So what happened? There's your question. Those are the questions you need to be asking, but you're not. You just want to say, hey, what can I give you to make your side happy? And so I can just push myself away from the table because I don't really want to have this conversation. Don't come to the fucking people that support you and that are on your side and that you say you're on our side and say, well, maybe it's the Second Amendment community. Maybe it's the citizens that believe in being a constitutional absolute. Maybe it's those people's fault. Maybe it's all the people that say we should own anything the government has. Maybe it's the people's fault that say we should have a civilian part of the population that is willing, able, and ready to combat the federal government. Those are the people that really don't want to have the conversation. Really? You think that I'm the one that don't want to have the conversation? You don't think that I want my kids to be safe in schools? No. I just understand that the federal government is corrupt. They no longer do anything to help normal civilian populations. Therefore, they are never going to come to the table and offer a solution that's going to fix that problem, because they need those school shootings. They need the mass shootings so they can continue to take shit away from you. They're the ones that don't want to have the conversation either. The conversation they are having is, how do we accelerate to the point where civilians do not have any ability to fight back? That's what they want. And we still have people that worship politicians like AOC and Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris. And why do they do that? Because they're wrapped up in the identity of these people. They're not wrapped up in, whether or not they support Roe v. Wade. That's just a fucking plus. They want them to stay in power because they say that they're like them. They're not. You, a normal person in the United States, cannot walk into Congress and make some backdoor deal to fuck over the rest of the United States population to make your bank account bigger. So you are not the same. So stop wrapping your identity up in these politicians. And like I said, the most important part is stop trusting your federal government. We have literally had good presidents come up and say, if the government wants to help, that's when you should turn around and run. Yet the most advanced time period in our country, we're only doing more of that. We're only giving them more power. And anytime they need more than what we're willing to offer up, they just make shit happen, like COVID-19, like mass shootings. And they make people like me seem like, we're tinfoil hat wearing people. When what it really is we have a zombie population that is just walking through life that does not want to accept any moral or country responsibility and actually fucking do something about it. And that's when the conversation really takes an ugly turn. Not that I would want it to, but it's just the inevitable. Because the other side doesn't want to have a conversation about fixing the problem. They just want to have a conversation on how to become more rich and more powerful. The other side of the table just wants to push themselves away until it's their turn to be in power so they can get more power and money. So at some point, the American people are going to have to stand up and say, you got to go. Well, do you really think if a portion, a militia, if you will, stood up in the United States made up of civilians and said, we the people hereby demand that all members of Congress lose their positions and go back to civilian life, and any fortune that they obtained in their time in the federal government, they must donate back to the people. Since they are the ones that want to come in and preach that the 1% doesn't pay their fair share, all the money, unless they can prove that they morally obtained it, to civilians in an open public court, they have to give that money back. And see how fast that army, those police, that CIA turns around and says, no, I don't think so. And I don't think there's anybody in the United States that genuinely believes that the outcome would be any different than that. They know that those politicians would be like, start shooting them. What the fuck are you talking about? These people are crazy. We're not giving up this power. We're not giving our money back. So if that's the case, if the case is a militia, we the people, stand up and demand that they remove themselves from office and hand back the financials that they gained from having privileges that normal civilians of the United States don't have, then how do we, the people, have any control? That's right. We don't. The game is over. You know, we keep getting wrapped up in the idea that there's going to be another civil war, to the point where it was on so many people's mind in the United States that the federal government decided, let's take their mind off of that and make them think about World War III. Even the federal government knows that whether it be an internal war, an external war, we're at a point in the world that violence very well may be have to use now. I don't know how other way to tell you. So it just, it's not cute. It's not cute anymore. It's not political anymore. And our only alternatives is to break up as a country, or for the people to take the country back. The federal government is broken. The federal government has won. So I guess that's kind of an oxymoron there, but no matter how you want to look at it, the federal government isn't here for the people. They're not here to protect your rights. They're not here to make sure you are guaranteed to have the freedoms that we are supposed to have. In fact, every single day, they go out and they do something to prevent you from having those rights. They do everything they can to slowly pull the threads at all the constitutional things that you are given when you are born into the United States. And when they struggle there, they take people that weren't born in the United States and flood them in and give them a new idea of America. So those people vote to help them pull strings away from your constitutional rights. So what are we going to do? Are we going to continue to tell our children that, hey, this happened, but, the federal government, they'll protect us. The president that we voted for, he's going to do all the things we want him to do to make our lives better. When are we going to stop believing that? We still have people in this country that, A, are still wrapped up in proving that the last election wasn't stolen, B, think the election was stolen. When are we going to start thinking about it doesn't matter who is in office, they are not doing what is best for the people? The presidential role in the United States is almost a smokescreen to allow the federal government to continue to fuck United States citizens in the ass. And it's not like we're not aware of it. I know, at least for the majority of people that I run into that are my age, 34, understand that there isn't going to be a Social Security check for us when we're too old to work. Who do you think did that? Do you think the federal government did that in the best interest of the people of our country? Joe Biden just sold a shit ton of oil to China. How do you think that affected our gas prices? How do you think that affected our oil reserves? Getting wrapped up here, tongue twisted. Our oil reserves. Not in a positive way. He didn't do it to help the American people. So, when are we going to start to wake up? Pull the smoke screen or blow it away from our eyes so we are able to see that we've come to the point. We have come to the point where maybe we don't need to commit violence and take the federal government back and give it back to the people. Maybe we're not at the point where we are forced to use violence, is the point. But we sure in the fuck should have the ability to do so. We sure in the hell should be allowed to openly try to build that structure, make that idea a reality. And that's one of the ways we can avert from doing violence. That's one of the ways we can stop this country from imploding and having a civil war. What you do is you hand the power to the people, equal power, not make believe, not welfare. You hand the power to the people that the federal government has. And even the federal government knows that this idea works because they do it with other countries. For example, if the United States government was the only ones to have nuclear capabilities, all the other countries would be mad. They would feel like at any given point, the United States government could come in and tell them they could do whatever they wanted because we were the only ones with the capability of nuclear war. So then we allow other countries to have the capability of nuclear war. And now it's to the point where we would like to think that Russia won't go nuclear, because if they go nuclear, China will go nuclear. And if China goes nuclear, then the United States would go nuclear. And it's ensured mutual destruction. Why do we not have that when it comes to the federal government and the civilian population? Because until we do, the federal government, they won't stop. They won't stop doing things to be more powerful, to give the politicians in power more money. The Skull and Bones Club will not evaporate out of our political system until we have something to threaten them with. And yes, we can hope and pray that our vote truly matters and we can make a difference. But at this point, the people in the United States are so mentally fucked and in a mindset that Americans should never been in the first place, that even if that vote counts, the federal government has enough ability and propaganda and outlets to sway them to vote however they want them to vote. And if it's close, well, then they'll just mail them in. They'll mail in a couple 100,000 of votes, and that'll change it. And the cycle continues. So the only real way to stop this cycle is to make sure that mutual destruction is there. When politicians, when governors come to their people in California and say, I don't believe the citizens of California should be allowed to own AR-15s, AKs, or any assault-style weapon, and yes, maybe a portion of the population made it possible for that governor to be in that position. But I don't think the majority of the population wants to give up their guns or their ability to self-defense and protection. But they can't do nothing about it. The governor can snap his fingers, an assault weapon ban is born, and even if you have an all-encompassing faith in the federal government, you're still talking years. You think you're going to get those rights and those weapons back after those years have passed? Think about all the money that you're going to lose to fight that battle. And not only are you losing your income for legal fees to fight the federal government to keep your property, your rights, and your protection, but you're also paying taxes, which are helping them fight against you. What the fuck are you talking about? What kind of system is that where anytime you have a disagreement with the federal government, you are the people that are funding them to defeat you in that conflict? That is outrageous. We have to think of a new way. It can't continue like this. In my opinion, it isn't continuing because it's over. The federal government has total, complete, and utter control. They are beyond the definition of tyrannical. A lot of your local politicians, some of the most outspoken ones, have blurred the line between politician and terrorist. They are forming small groups and communities to help turn on the normal population of the United States. And I've talked about this before. Why do we have such an issue with ending terrorism in the United States? They want to keep talking about January 6th and saying they're terrorist and insurrectionist and white wing extremists are the biggest problem in the United States. They are trying to justify labeling you as a terrorist. Well, why is that? Well, we spent the last 20 to 30 years funding our federal government to go and terminate terrorists with extreme prejudice. Literally put bullets in their fucking head. And now that same government is telling other United States citizens that we're the same. We're just like the Taliban. We're just like the terrorist that they put those bullets in their head. You don't see something wrong with that picture? You don't see what's going on here? Why don't they go after other domestic terrorism as strong as they do right-wing extremists? Well, because those right-wing extremists, in most cases, in most definitions, are prime examples of old American ideas and being a patriot, and probably believe in having the ability to protect themselves from the federal government. So to the federal government, they may very well seem like terrorists. But they are not terrorists, and they are not a threat to the American people. They are a threat to who is in charge in the government right now because they are tyrannical. So, of course, right-wing extremists are the federal government's enemies. Of course, it may seem like they're terrorists to the idea that what we have for leadership in our federal government is trying to accomplish right now. But as soon as you grasp that question, that concept, that we can't trust the federal government, the faster you will develop a mindset where you can see that they are tyrannical. And now, if you believe in the idea of America, if you believe in preserving the freedom for your children and the generations after, now is the time where you do what our forefathers gave us the blueprint for, what many Americans have fought, died, and bled for. It is our job to make sure that a tyrannical government falls. It is our job to take the power from that tyrannical government back and make something that our forefathers built for us. And we are so lazy, so corrupt, so immoral that we don't even want to think about it. So we have to get people to start to think about it from a different perspective. And like, this is to wrap it up, why I think that question is so important. Why it should be the question that every American is asking themselves now. Do I trust the federal government? And if that answer is no, then what are you going to do? What are you going to do to stop someone so powerful, so violent, that you do not trust, that holds utter control over almost every aspect in your life? How are you going to take that back? You're not going to do it by yourself. You know, us here at the Death by Tyranny podcast, that's kind of our motto. That's kind of the mission statement here. The name of the podcast is Death by Tyranny because that's how I believe we will die. Death will be by tyranny. And I've said it all the time, so I guess it is kind of our mission statement here. It's going to be one by one, gun by gun. Meaning, if they don't have to take your guns away and kill you in that conflict in doing so, then they will brainwash you one by one until we, the people, are so numb and so ignorant to the fact that they are being tyrannical that they don't really have to worry about you. So either way, your death will come by tyranny. One by one, gun by gun, death by tyranny. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Make sure you kind of keep that in your head. Start looking into some of the past things that especially the Obama administration did to people that were only doing what that branch of government told them to do. And then they were stabbed in the back. Remember to try to go and listen to the Vigilance Elite podcast with Alex Prince, the ex-CEO of Blackwater. I think it'll open up a lot of your guys' eyes, make you see that no matter how much you give to this country, they will keep taking. And when they cannot take anymore, they will stab you in the back, get rid of you, make it look like you're the bad guy, you're the enemy. And that's all I have tonight, guys. Hopefully some of you guys take this a little bit closer to heart, to the point where you actually have a conversation with yourself. Are you willing to continue to live under a tyrannical government? Is this the government and the country you want to leave behind for the generations to come? Do you really want to leave this battle for our children? Or do you want to fight this fight now? So, I think I'm going to hop off here. I love you guys. Stay safe. Stay prepared. God bless. America first. Peace, y'all.